They thought he was worthless, mocked him, broke him, and laughed at his pain. But years later, in a glass boardroom, the tables turned, because the boy they ridiculed was now the powerful CEO holding their fate in his hands. Ibadan was always alive with the noise of buses, traders shouting their prices, and the chatter of students who filled the streets around the University of Ibadan. Inside the school campus, young dreams were being shaped, and futures were being built. Among the many faces that walked the dusty paths every day was a quiet boy named Femi. Femi was not like most of the other students. While some came from wealthy families and carried the latest phones, laptops, and designer shoes, Femi carried only one small black backpack. His clothes were simple, sometimes a faded blue shirt, sometimes a white one that had lost its brightness after too many washes. He wore the same pair of brown slippers almost every day, and though they were worn out, he cleaned them carefully each morning. Despite his appearance, Femi had something that many others did not, a sharp, brilliant mind. His lecturers knew him as the boy who always had the right answers, the one who could solve problems on the board when everyone else was confused. But brilliance was not enough to protect him from the cruelty of some of his fellow students. On campus, there were two girls whose names everyone knew, Tola and Saad. They were inseparable, always together, and always in the spotlight. Tola was tall and light-skinned, with braided hair that always seemed freshly done. Saad, a little shorter, loved to wear flashy clothes and big earrings. They were both beautiful, confident, and loved by many male students who tried to impress them. But behind their laughter and charm was something darker. They enjoyed mocking people they thought were beneath them. And for reasons Femi could never understand, he became their favorite target. It started with little things. One morning, as Femi walked past the cafeteria holding a tray of gari and beans, the cheapest meal on campus, Tola smirked and whispered loudly enough for others to hear. "See as this one day chop prison food." A beg, who even invited him to university? The table of students around her burst into laughter. Femi kept walking, his ears burning, pretending not to hear. Another time, during a lecture, Saad noticed Femi's pen was broken, and he was trying to write with it carefully. She raised her voice and said, Femi. So poor you cannot even buy big pen? Maybe we should donate money for you." Again, laughter filled the room, and though the lecturer tried to silence them, the damage was already done. But the worst moments came outside class. One afternoon, Femi sat under a tree reading his notes. Tola and Saad passed by with a group of their friends. Without warning, Tola grabbed a plastic bottle filled with water from the puddle and splashed it onto Femi's books. The pages soaked instantly, the ink running into a blur. "Oops. My hand slipped," she said with mock innocence. Saad laughed loudly. "This boy is EF. Even Rain no like him. He is always suffering." The group cackled as they walked away, leaving Femi staring at his destroyed notes. His heart pounded, and his eyes stung with unshed tears. But he told himself not to cry, not in front of them. Not here. The final blow came during a popular campus party. Femi did not usually attend such events, but a classmate had begged him to come. For once, he wanted to feel normal, to laugh and dance like the others. He wore his cleanest shirt, ironed it twice, and borrowed a friend's sneakers just so he would not look too out of place. At the party, music boomed and students danced in the open hall. Femi stood near the back, watching, nervous but smiling faintly. After some time, he gathered courage to step forward and speak to a group of classmates. But before he could finish his sentence, Tola spotted him. With a mischievous grin, she whispered something to Saad, and they both moved closer. "Look who decided to show face," Tola said loudly, enough for the crowd to hear. "Not church rat come party oh. Femi, a beg, who dash you confidence to come here?" The laughter was instant. Someone shouted, "Give him broom make he sweep the floor." Saad walked up to him, pretending to fix his collar, then suddenly pushed him hard on the chest. Femi stumbled backward and fell to the ground. The crowd roared with laughter, phones came out, and a few even recorded the scene. Femi lay there for a moment, his palms scraping against the rough floor, his face burning with shame. He wanted the earth to swallow him whole. Slowly, he got up, dusted his borrowed sneakers, and walked out of the hall. Behind him, the sound of laughter echoed, each giggle like a knife to his chest. That night, as he walked the long road back to his hostel, the city lights of Ibadan glowing faintly in the distance, Femi's mind was heavy. Tears rolled down his cheeks freely this time, hidden by the darkness. He thought of his late parents who had sacrificed everything to send him to school. He thought of the endless mocking and the cruel eyes that never saw his worth. But somewhere deep in his chest, something hardened. He whispered to himself, voice trembling but firm. Life will not always be like this. One day, they will remember me. It was a vow, a seed planted in the soil of his pain, waiting for the day it would bloom. And that was the night Femi's story truly began. After graduation, while many of his classmates posed in fine suits and dresses, taking pictures to celebrate with their families, Femi walked quietly across the University of Ibadan campus with his single bag. He had no parents to clap for him, no friends to celebrate with, no money for a party. He simply collected his certificate, held it close to his chest, and whispered a prayer that the future would be better than his past. The years that followed were not easy. Femi moved to Abeokuta, where he rented a small room in a crowded compound. The room was so small that he could touch both walls if he stretched his arms. The ceiling leaked whenever it rained, and sometimes rats scurried across the floor at night. But Femi was determined. To survive, he took small teaching jobs, tutoring secondary school students in mathematics and computer studies. His pay was meager, barely enough for food and rent, but he never complained. By day, he taught children equations and coding basics. By night, when the compound grew quiet, Femi sat by a kerosene lamp with his old laptop. That laptop was his greatest treasure. It had cracks on the screen and missing keys, but it still worked. On it, Femi taught himself new programming languages, studied online courses, and dreamed of building something great. There were nights he went hungry, surviving only on gari soaked in water. There were mornings he walked miles to save transport money. Yet, with each sacrifice, his vision grew stronger. One evening, while at a small cybercafe, Femi met an elderly man named Mr. Ade, a retired professor who often came there to read online journals. Mr. Ade noticed the young man's focus and curiosity. They began to talk, and slowly, Femi shared his ideas about technology, about how farmers, traders, and small market women struggled with payments in rural areas, and how an affordable digital platform could change their lives. Mr. Ade was impressed. "Young man," he said, adjusting his glasses, "you may not have money, but you have something far more valuable, vision. Don't waste it." From that day, Mr. Ade became Femi's mentor. He introduced him to a small network of local investors in Abeokuta. Most of them were skeptical at first. They saw a skinny young man in worn-out clothes, speaking passionately about technology. Some dismissed him, others laughed politely. But one investor decided to give him a chance, a modest amount to start. With that little seed money, Femi registered his first company and began building a mobile payment app. He named it PayLink, designed specifically for traders in rural markets who had no access to big banks. The app was simple. It allowed people to send and receive money using even the cheapest phones, without needing internet. The road was not smooth. At first, nobody wanted to use the app. Market women laughed, saying they trusted only cash. Traders shook their heads, saying technology was for rich city people. But Femi refused to give up. He spent weeks moving from one market to another, patiently teaching women how to use it, helping traders try their first transactions, and even fixing issues himself when something went wrong. Slowly, word began to spread. A woman in Kuto market used PayLink to receive money from her son in Lagos instantly. A yam seller in Itoku market used it to save his earnings safely instead of keeping cash at home where thieves could steal it. Small victories began to multiply, and trust grew. Within 2 years, PayLink had thousands of users across Ogun State. Investors began to take notice. Femi was invited to pitch his idea at a tech event in Abuja. He had never been on a plane before, and his shoes were still the same pair he wore during his NYSC days. But when he stood on stage and spoke about his vision, his passion moved the audience. He explained how technology should not only serve the rich in Lagos or Abuja, but also the poor farmer in Ogbomosho, the fish seller in Akure, and the pepper trader in Ibadan. After his presentation, larger investors reached out. More funding came. His company grew. Offices opened in more states. By the time he was in his early 30s, Paylink had expanded into one of the biggest fintech companies in Nigeria, with millions of users and partnerships across Africa. Femi moved the headquarters to Abuja, into a tall glass building that carried the company's logo proudly on its walls. Inside, hundreds of employees worked daily, building the dream he once scribbled in his tiny room in Abeokuta. Despite his immense wealth and fame, Femi never forgot his beginnings. He still visited small markets, sometimes without security, just to listen to ordinary people. He sponsored scholarships for poor students, remembering how he once struggled. He built tech hubs in rural areas to train young people. His face appeared on magazine covers, and newspapers called him the boy who changed Africa's payments. But deep inside, Femi carried scars. No matter how many billions he made, no matter how many awards he collected, the memories of his university days never left him. The laughter, the insults, the humiliation at the party, it was all etched in his heart. Not because he wanted revenge, but because those wounds had shaped him. Sometimes, late at night, Femi would stand by the window of his Abuja office, looking out at the city lights. He would remember the boy who once walked home in tears, whispering that life would not always remain the same. And he would smile softly to himself, knowing that prophecy had come true. What he didn't know, however, was that destiny was about to bring his past back to him in the most unexpected way. And when that moment came, the tables would turn. Life has a way of humbling even the proudest hearts. Years had passed since those carefree university days, and the world that once seemed like a playground for Tola and Saad had turned into a battlefield of disappointments. Tola, the tall and confident diva of the University of Ibadan, had once been admired by almost every young man on campus. Back then, she believed beauty would open every door. She married quickly after graduation, choosing a wealthy businessman in Port Harcourt. For a while, she lived the life she had always dreamed of: fancy clothes, weekend trips, expensive perfumes. But her fairy tale crumbled when her husband's business collapsed. He became violent, and eventually the marriage ended in divorce. By the time she returned to Ibadan, her reputation was in ruins. With no savings, no stable career, and no children to comfort her, she was forced to move in with her aging aunt in a cramped apartment. The girl who once mocked Femi for eating Gary now had to survive on the same Gary, sometimes without sugar, sometimes without milk. At night, she scrolled endlessly through her phone, applying for jobs, but rejection emails filled her inbox. Her once flawless nails were now chipped, and her designer clothes were hidden away, replaced by cheaper fabrics from the local market. Sada's story was not much different. After school, she had boasted to everyone that she was moving abroad to start a fashion business. She posted pictures on social media, showing off in front of airports, pretending she had made it. But the truth was harsh. She had invested all her savings into a deal with a so-called international business partner who promised to set her up in Dubai. By the time she discovered it was a scam, it was too late. Her money was gone, her dreams shattered. With shame weighing heavy on her shoulders, she returned to Nigeria, where survival became her daily fight. She tried selling clothes on credit, but customers rarely paid back. She tried organizing small fashion shows, but none succeeded. Soon, debts piled up, and she found herself begging friends and family for help. The girl who once wore flashy earrings and mocked others for being too local, was now selling second-hand clothes at Oja Oba Market, haggling with women she once would have laughed at. Tola and Saad, who once ruled the campus as queens, now found themselves united by something they never expected: struggle. They ran into each other one afternoon at a small cafe in Abuja. Both were shocked at how much the other had changed. Their makeup could no longer hide the stress in their eyes, and their smiles lacked the confidence they once carried. They spoke for hours, catching up on their painful stories. By the end of their conversation, they realized one thing: they needed to rebuild their lives. A week later, while searching online, Saad stumbled across a job posting. It was for one of the fastest-growing fintech companies in Nigeria, headquartered in Abuja. The position promised stability, good pay, and opportunities for growth. She immediately thought of Tola. "Tola," she said over the phone, "this is it. This is the kind of company that can change our lives." The name of the company was Paylink. But neither of them knew the man behind it. They had heard of the billionaire founder, of course. His face was often in the news, his name mentioned in conferences, but they had never bothered to connect the dots. They didn't know that the very company they were hoping would save them was built by the boy they once humiliated. On the morning of the interview, both women dressed as best as they could. Tola wore a neatly ironed navy blue dress with modest heels, while Saad chose a cream blouse and a pencil skirt. They applied makeup carefully, hoping to cover the signs of stress and struggle on their faces. As they walked into the tall glass building in Abuja, their hearts raced with nervous excitement. The reception area was modern, filled with busy employees moving in and out, dressed sharply, carrying laptops and files. The air smelled of success, and for the first time in years, Tola and Saad felt a spark of hope. At the front desk, they signed in and were directed to the top floor for the interview. As the elevator doors closed behind them, they whispered encouragements to each other. "This is our chance, Saad," Tola said, forcing a smile. "We'll get this job, and things will turn around." "Yes," Saad replied, gripping her handbag tightly. "We just need to impress whoever is in charge. We can do this." The elevator chimed, and the doors slid open to reveal a luxurious hallway with glass doors and framed awards lining the walls. The company's achievements were proudly displayed: Best FinTech in Africa, Most Innovative App, Young CEO of the Year. None of the awards carried Femi's picture. Only the company's logo stood out, bold and proud. A secretary ushered them into a large boardroom. The table was long and polished, surrounded by leather chairs. At the far end of the room, a chair sat slightly turned, facing the window. The city of Abuja glittered beyond the glass. Tola and Saad adjusted their dresses nervously, pulling out their CVs and rehearsing answers in their heads. Their minds raced with thoughts of opportunity, of escape from their miserable lives. But what they did not know, what they could not possibly imagine, was that in a matter of seconds, the chair would turn. And when it did, the face they would see would not just belong to a CEO. It would be the face of the boy they once mocked. The church rat they once pushed to the floor. The boardroom was silent except for the hum of the air conditioner. Tola and Saad sat nervously, clutching their files as they waited. Their eyes kept wandering around the room: polished mahogany table, sparkling chandelier, walls lined with certificates and plaques. Everything screamed power and success. Suddenly, the chair at the end of the room turned slowly. And there he was. Femi. But this was not the Femi they remembered from the University of Ibadan. Gone was the shy boy in faded shirts and slippers. Sitting before them now was a man transformed. His suit was perfectly tailored, his wrist carried a sleek designer watch, and his shoes shone as if they had never touched dust. His presence filled the room. Even without speaking, he commanded respect. Behind him, two bodyguards stood silently, watching every movement. For a split second, Tola's heart stopped. Her mind flashed back to the university, the cafeteria, the lectures, the party where she had laughed as he fell to the ground. The boy she once mocked as a church rat was now the man sitting at the head of this empire. Sada's palms grew damp with sweat. She bit her lower lip nervously, realizing too late that destiny had caught up with them. But Femi did not show anger. Instead, he smiled politely, leaning forward with his hands clasped on the table. His calmness was more terrifying than rage. Good morning, he said in a steady voice. Please, tell me about yourselves. Tola cleared her throat quickly. Good morning, sir. My name is Tola. I have experience in client relations and... Saad interrupted nervously, eager to impress. And I am Saad, sir. I've worked in fashion and small businesses, but I am very good with customer engagement, very hard-working. Their words tumbled over each other, rehearsed lines spoken with fake confidence. They smiled too much, gestured too quickly. Their nervous giggles betrayed them. Femi sat back, watching quietly, his expression unreadable. He let them finish their pitch, allowed them to sell themselves as though he were just another CEO, as though their past had never happened. When the silence finally settled, Femi leaned forward again, his voice soft but sharp enough to pierce through the air. Do you remember, he asked, the University of Ibadan? Both women froze. Tola blinked rapidly. Yes, sir, she said cautiously. Femi tilted his head, his eyes locking on hers. Do you remember a boy you called a church rat? The room grew colder. Silence pressed down on them like a heavy weight. Sada's hands shook as she tried to grip her handbag tighter. Sir, her voice failed. Tola stammered, her words tripping over each other. Femi, it's you. We didn't mean, it was all in the past. Femi's lips curved into a small smile, but his eyes remained firm. Yes. It is me. The same boy you mocked for eating Gary. The same boy whose books you destroyed. The same boy you pushed to the ground in front of the whole school. Neither woman could speak. Their throats tightened, their eyes wide with disbelief. Femi rose from his seat slowly, buttoning his jacket. His height, his composure, his aura, it made them feel smaller than ever before. He walked slowly around the table, stopping beside them. The faint scent of his cologne lingered in the air, a scent of wealth and power. You see, he continued, his voice calm, life is a circle. You thought you were untouchable then. You thought mocking a poor boy would cost you nothing. But today, here you are, sitting in my boardroom, asking me for a job. Tola swallowed hard, her face flushed with shame. She wanted to vanish, to escape the piercing truth in his words. Femi, she whispered. Please, we were young, we didn't know better. People change. Give us a chance. Saad quickly nodded, her voice trembling. Yes, Femi. We were foolish. We didn't see your value then, but we respect you now. Please, don't hold the past against us. Femi studied them for a long moment, his eyes scanning their faces. He could see the desperation in their eyes, the fear in their posture. They were no longer the queens of campus. They were broken women, humbled by life, begging for mercy. And yet, instead of satisfaction, Femi felt something else, pity. He walked back to his chair, sat down, and folded his hands again. His silence stretched across the room until Tola and Saad could barely breathe. Finally, he spoke. I am not the same boy you humiliated. I am not here to repay cruelty with cruelty. But I need you to understand something, the seeds you plant in people's lives, they do not die. They grow. And one day, you will sit in the shade of those same trees. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The women's eyes filled with tears. They lowered their heads, unable to meet his gaze. Femi leaned back, his expression softening slightly. I will not humiliate you the way you humiliated me. But I will not hire you either. Not because I hate you, but because this company, my company, deserves people who build others up, not people who tear them down. The finality in his tone broke them. Tola's shoulders slumped. Saad wiped her face quickly, ashamed of her tears. They realized, in that moment, that the past could not be erased. It had finally caught up with them, and the power they once used to destroy had returned to humble them. The interview was over. And for Tola and Saad, it was the most painful lesson of their lives. The silence in the boardroom lingered long after Femi's final words. Tola and Saad sat frozen, their hearts heavy, their eyes fixed on the polished table before them. They had come in with confidence, dreaming of new beginnings. Now, they felt as if the ground had been pulled from under them. Femi leaned back in his chair, his expression calm, almost gentle. For a moment, the women feared he might call security to throw them out, or perhaps laugh at their desperation the way they once laughed at his pain. But instead, he reached into his drawer and pulled out 2 white envelopes. Without a word, he slid them across the table toward them. They looked at the envelopes in confusion. Tola frowned slightly, her hand hovering over one of them. "What is this?" she asked cautiously. "Open it," Femi replied. With trembling fingers, they tore the envelopes. Inside each one was a check, written in their names, the amount enough to start a small business. Their eyes widened. They looked at each other in disbelief, then back at Femi. "Why?" Saad asked in a broken voice. Her eyes filled with tears. "Why would you do this for us? After everything, after the way we treated you?" Femi's eyes softened as he leaned forward. His voice was calm, but each word carried weight. "Because," he said slowly, "I am not repaying evil with evil. I am showing you what kindness feels like. The same kindness you denied me years ago." The words struck deep. Tola's eyes welled up, her pride crumbling. She lowered her head, ashamed. Saad covered her mouth, her tears now flowing freely. Femi continued. "You see, life has a funny way of bringing us back to the seeds we planted. Back then, you planted humiliation in my life. You mocked me, you broke me, and you thought I would never rise. But your cruelty became the fuel for my success. It made me stronger, more determined. And now, life has brought you back to sit across from me, not as queens, but as seekers." He paused, his gaze steady. "I could easily repay you with the same humiliation. But then I would be no different from you. Instead, I choose to show you the power of grace. Take that money. Use it wisely. Build something new. And remember, the way you treat people will always return to you, good or bad." The room fell silent again, but this time it was not tense. It was heavy with realization. Tola could not hold back anymore. She broke down, tears streaming down her face. "Femi, we are sorry. Truly sorry. We didn't know what we were doing. Please forgive us." Saad reached for his hand timidly. "We were foolish, Femi. If only we could go back and change things, but we can't. All we can do is say sorry." Femi nodded gently but did not pull his hand away. "I forgave you a long time ago. Not for your sake, but for mine. Carrying bitterness only poisons the soul. I let go of that pain years ago so I could move forward. But I wanted you to feel what it means to receive kindness instead of cruelty. That is your second chance." The women left the boardroom with heavy hearts, holding the envelopes tightly. As they stepped outside the towering glass building, the Abuja sun hit their faces, and they both felt something shift inside them. For the first time in years, their pride was gone. In its place was humility, and determination. Weeks later, Tola used her money to open a small catering business. She had always loved cooking but had never taken it seriously. To her surprise, customers began to grow. With consistency and hard work, she built a steady stream of clients. She no longer cared about being the diva. For the first time, she found dignity in honest work. Saad, on the other hand, invested her money into a boutique, but this time she did things differently. Instead of chasing flashy dreams and showing off, she built relationships with customers, treated them with respect, and worked hard. Slowly, her business grew. The two women stayed in touch, often reminding each other of the lesson they had learned. They became advocates in their communities, speaking at youth events about the dangers of pride and bullying. They shared their story openly, warning others not to repeat their mistakes. One day, years later, Tola stood on a small stage at a youth conference in Ibadan. Young students filled the hall, eager to hear her words. With a microphone in hand, she told them her story. "I once thought beauty and pride were enough to make me great," she confessed, her voice trembling. "But I learned the hard way that life does not reward arrogance. We mocked someone we thought was nothing, but he became everything we wished to be. And when life brought us back to him, he showed us mercy instead of revenge. That is the kind of greatness you should aim for, not pride, not cruelty, but kindness." The hall erupted in applause. Among the crowd sat Femi, quietly watching, a faint smile on his lips. He had not only risen above his past, he had transformed it into a lesson for others. And so, the story came full circle. The boy who once walked home in tears now walked in grace. The women who once laughed at him now carried his lesson to the world. If you like this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button, like, comment and share the video. Thanks for watching and catch you in the next video.